Okay, in your lecture, I made mention that we cover things in class. That lecture was done the last time the course was offered, when it was offered face to face. So I'm doing another recording here to go over the things we would have gone over in class. So what I have up on the screen right now is sample score reports from the Naglieri Nonverbal Ability Test. And the Naglieri is, when we talk about a nonverbal test, it's a brief measure of abilities, but it's anything that doesn't require reading or language, that the child doesn't have to read something, they don't have to answer verbally, anything like that. So that makes it a good multicultural assessment. So if a child doesn't speak English, they would still you be able to compare what their results are with someone who was an English speaker. So the way that this test works is that there are pictures and patterns, and so the child is looking for things to complete the picture or to complete the pattern in there. It's a really common test that is utilized by school districts for gifted and talented identification. It's also good for a child who has a hearing impairment that you might have issues with giving a verbal test to them. So the first side of the screen over here, this is a sample individual student report. So this is a report for Pat Zenai. Pat is in kindergarten and is 6 years old, 2 months. Well, what we know about in looking at that is in Texas, the cutoff date for enrollment for kindergarten is they have to be 5 by September 1. So Pat was 6 on September 1. So he's older for his grade. So when we look at these scores, they're not comparing Pat to kindergarten. They're comparing Pat to other 6-year-olds at 2 months. So that's where his norms are going to come in here. When you look over here, here's, tells you about the scores that they have. There were 48 questions on the test. Of that, Pat got 36 correct. The scaled score, remember, that's a score that this individual assessment has utilized, and it's done statistically. So because you can't do statistics on 36 out of 48. So this is converted to the scaled score number. If you took the scaled score from this assessment and looked at it in comparison to another, it would be an invalid comparison because the scaled score for each assessment is particular to that assessment and how that one was determined. On the normal curve equivalent, he achieved a 72.8, and a stay 9 is a 7. So this tells us that that he's a pretty bright little guy. So when we look at this right here, this is an index that's a part of this assessment, and this is going to be kind of a rough nonverbal IQ. So this child would have about 117 nonverbal IQ, and again, that's a rough score. And then in the percentile ranking, he achieved an 86th. He ranked in the 86th percentile. So now, remember, that doesn't mean he made 86% of the test, because if we go back over here and you look at this, 36 out of 48, that would be 7. He answered 75% of the questions correctly. So this tells you how he compares to other students. So he did better than 86% of the students in the norm group who took this test. So then we've got our normal curve equivalent up here that gives you a little bit more descriptive stuff. So they're saying that anywhere between the 90 to 110 on this NAI score would be average. His 117 falls in the high average, and it's really in the high average. So he's bumping over here close to the superior level. And then the 86th percentile, if you just brought this on down right here, this is 86. You can tell this is not a scaled thing, that there's not equal distance between all of these. So unless this was all marked out, you couldn't tell that exactly that was an 86th percentile. So we see Pat did well on this test. Then we jump over here to this other side of this, and this is a master list of test results for a classroom. So this is a particular teachers group, or it could be a grade level. A lot of times, not all kids are tested for GTs. It kind of depends upon school policy. Sometimes teachers will nominate, parents can nominate. Sometimes they do a universal screening of all students. So when we look at this, we have student name, student number, and the student age. And if we look at this, we've got a big range here. Look, we've got this 5-year-old, 5 years, 2 months, and Dawn Fawn is just barely old enough to be in kindergarten. So this is going to be a young kindergartner. And AAAA up here is 7 years and 9 months. So really over age for this grade. But they're all kindergartners. They all took the A level of the test. Here's the raw score. So this first little guy, A, only got 10 out of 48 correct. And then you look at the scaled scores of 466. This is the NAI, the rough verbal IQ. So we've got a rough verbal IQ of 44, which, you know, is an indication that we most likely have some learning issues or developmental issues here. It's likely, especially when you look at this age range, that this is a special education student. Scored in the first percentile, the first A9, and got the normal curve equivalent of 1. So obviously this little guy's having some problems here. DNA means that they did not attempt the test. So although this child was listed, was most likely not present when the test was given. And then there's another one down here. Let's see this NAI. You see this one was present evidently, and the test was turned in for scoring, but it got 0 out of 48 correct. Now, that may not, I mean, you would have to investigate what happened there. Did the child just not attempt? Did, you know, they really get all of them incorrect? So that would want to be something that you would want to be sure that you're looking at to figure out what was going on there. So this is going to be part of your assignment here. What I'm going to ask you to do with your assignment, and you'll have these copies. I'll link these copies in the module so you can print these out and look at them again. I want you to look at this, and I want you to determine which students you believe would qualify for gifted and talented, or that you'd be looking at if there's other considerations. Sometimes, you know, there will be multiple measures that a school uses, but I want you to identify which students would be considered for gifted, and then I want you to identify students that you think further assessment might need to be done. And this is a sample, so these are all made up things. These scores, I'm looking over here at all these first percentile and first A9, and it's unlikely that this is what a typical score would look like. There's lots of really, really low scores on here. And so this wouldn't be what you would typically see in a class listing. So I'm going to close these, and we're going to look at the next thing. You bear with me here a minute while I get some of these things up. So, okay. This is an Iowa Test of Basic Skills. Okay, this used to be one that was really commonly given. I took this test as a elementary school, or as a public school student. I don't remember when we quit taking it. And then I also administered this test. So back before we had state mandated testing, the STAR, it started out as TEAMS, then TOS, then TAKS, then STAR. Back before we had that, we typically, as public education, evaluated our kids every year. And this was a common thing, a common test that was used. So in looking at this, this is a third grade class. It says the child was homeschooled here, so we see the test date, what norms were used. I'm not seeing a birth date on here anywhere. So this one looks at, it's a norm reference test, and it's giving you the different areas here that are tested. So they take vocabulary and reading, and those two scores, those two subtests come together to give you a reading total. Okay, and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 individual subtests that come together to give you a language total. Then you have 3 that come together to give you a math total. And then these totals, the reading, language, and math, give you a core total. Okay, those are the core subjects. So then we have social studies score, a science score, and then we've got maps and diagrams, reference materials for a source of information total, and then a composite score. So this is how they performed on all the different scores. So then we've got the scaled score here. Remember that these scaled scores really are not something that give us a lot of comparison as far as test to test, but it would tell you the scaling would be the same for all of these. So let's see, what's the highest scaled score here? The highest is science. It looks like no, right here, usage, language, usage, and expression. So the highest score here is a 239, and that gives a grade equivalent of a 7.8. So then when you look at this 1.75, that gives you a grade equivalent of 3.2. So what that does is it helps you to identify the child's strengths within these different subtests. You can look at those. But there are other things that give you that as well. So you've got the grade equivalent here for all of these. Now remember, that does not mean that, like this reading comprehension, that does not mean that this child is reading at the 4th grade 6-month level. It means that this child scored as well as students in the 4th grade 6-month who had performed on the test for an average score. So where it's above where you would expect to be, it doesn't necessarily tell you the reading comprehension level. Okay, then we have the stay 9 here, and so you can see we range from a 4 to a 9, and then we have the percentage, or the percentiles, I'm sorry. So if we looked at this in listening, this child scored at the 39th percentile, but in math computation, they scored at the 99th percentile. So then you have this graphic representation over here. So this gray bar line right here is the composite score. So that tells you that a real quick graphic representation of strengths and challenges. So these subject areas over here are going to be the strongest areas. Obviously, this is going to be the lowest areas. So these graphic representations give you a quick look at it, and then you can go, and it's if you're explaining this to parents, they may not understand all these numbers over here, and so it tells you, it helps them to understand this as a non-professional. So then we get down here, and each of these are broken down a little bit more. So in reading comprehension, there are subscales within the reading comprehension. So we've got factual understanding, inferences and interpretation, and analysis and generalization. And again, we've got this gray scale here, but this one is different. This gray scale tells you what the mid-range is. So you can see where the student is performing at a high level, where they're, at an average level where we would expect, and then what's low. So with this one, you're also going to have an assignment, and this is going to be to do an interpretation of this. And so you're going to write out, just if you were explaining this to a parent, you're going to write out what you would say to that parent as far as explaining these scores, and then as far as interpreting these results and identifying the child's strengths and weaknesses. And I'll have more information on that in the directions. So now we have a PSAT score here. This is the preliminary scholastic aptitude test put out by the College Board, which is the same group that does the SAT. And on this, most students take the PSAT in 11th grade for the purpose of national merit qualification. It's the score during 11th grade that does that. A lot of schools give the test, like I can tell you the high school where I went, where I taught, or where I was a counselor, we gave this test, the school paid to give this test to every 10th grader. And part of it was for us to kind of get a preliminary score. And so that if we saw a student that really had high scores, that we could say, you know what, there's the possibility that you could reach national merit. And so let's look at where you need to be focusing in order to improve your skills. The other thing that it can be used for is to identify kids who are maybe are not at the correct grade level. Or I'm sorry, not grade level, not at the correct instructional level. So if you have AP classes, if you have honors classes, classes that are more challenging, if you're seeing a child, so like look right here, these, we got some pretty good math scores here. Well, no, if you look up here, it's really not. That if we looked at this, okay, so this student made a score of 50 in critical reading, 52 in math, and 42 in writing. So when we look here, he scored higher than, I think that says 55%. That's really small writing. I think it says 55% of juniors. This is a child that if they're taking regular classes, it's probably an appropriate placement. On math, it's a little bit higher than reading, but not terribly. It's the 57th percentile. So this would, again, if they're in normal classes, regular level, then this is probably an appropriate placement. In writing, this got a 44, and this is in the 33rd percentile. So this is an area to focus on for improvement. But let's say that this student scored in the 81st percentile in math, but was in regular classes. That would give you an indication that maybe this child needed to be bumped up to an honors level or AP level class. So it helps you to look at placement decisions as well. Then, and this is the report that's given to the students. So you see where it says your skills. So this tells them kind of how they rank in all these different areas. This right here, this online access code, it gives them access to some college planning things that go hand in hand with taking the test. And then this tells them their actual answers on the test. So on one, again, this is really small. On question number 1, they answered A. It is the correct answer. And if you look down here, I can't see what that says. Let's see if we blow that up, if we can see what that says. Hey, look, that works. It says it was an easy question. Okay, but then when you got to 3, the student answered A. The correct answer is C, and this is a medium level question. Okay, and then this one, the H, was a hard question. So it lets them see they can go through and say, here's how many easy answers I got right. Here's how many medium answers, and here's how many hard questions. So if they went through this and they looked and they missed all the hard questions, but they got all the medium and easy questions right, or the majority of them, it gives them a little bit of confidence in this. And then here's this College Board Quick Start as well in their access code. So I just wanted you to see what this looks like. I'm going to tell you what the practice was when I was a high school counselor. Was we had a night, if we sent, this is some explanation stuff on this as well, that if we just handed these scores out to the students, it's unlikely that they would get home to the parents, or they often didn't get home. So we would have a night in which parents came to campus and they picked up their scores, and I did an overall explanation and interpretation of these. So I did for the parents exactly what I just did for you. I went through this. I talked about it in a general sense. They had their child's scores in front of them, and so that would give them, an understanding of how to interpret that. If a parent didn't show up, then the students could pick up their scores the next day we'd hand them out the next day at school. One thing I didn't show you, this is the National Merit Scholarship thing here. And so this says that the selection index was 146 and put them in the 47th percentile. So this is not a student that would likely qualify for national merit. And there's a couple of other, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to remember all this. I know there's a Hispanic, there's a separate scoring for Hispanic. And I don't think there is for African Americans. I'm not sure about that. I can't remember. Anyway, so that gives you information about a PSAT score and what that looks like. Okay, so this next thing that I'm going to show you here is a system. Well, let me do this one first, this classroom observation one here. Okay, when you have a teacher that is expressing concerns about a child, or a parent is asking for some type of evaluation. This is a form that I created that gives behavioral observations. When you have parents or teachers who are asking you to do an assessment and evaluation that could lead to a diagnosis, you have to be so terribly careful. In a school setting, we cannot recommend that a child be evaluated for a behavioral disorder unless the school is willing to take on not only the cost of that assessment, but the treatment for that assessment as well. So when we have kids who look like they may be presenting with some attentional issues, some ADHD type things, then what you want to do is you want to talk to the parent from the standpoint of classroom observations. So this is a form that I would give to my teachers, and they could go through and look at all of these behaviors. They could click, when they occurred, never, sometimes, often, or very often. And then in discussing with a parent, you can say, these are the things that we are seeing in class. These are the behavioral observations. And if a parent asks to, what does this mean? That you can say things like, sometimes these are an indication that there could be more evaluation that needs to be done. As a school, we're not qualified to do that, or we don't do that in a school setting. I was in a unique situation in that I'm an LPC, and so I am qualified to do this, but I didn't do it in the school setting because of the potential for having to assume responsibility for treatment. Your LSSP, your licensed specialist in school psychology, is qualified to do this. But typically, we steer clear of these types of things. We never, ever, ever say, you need to go to the doctor or your child needs to be on medication. And your teachers need to understand that. That's a very, very slippery slope that you can get into. So as a counselor, I would say things, this could be an indication that there's more going on here than we're recognizing. Sometimes these are the types of behaviors that we see with attention deficit. Some parents choose to seek an outside evaluation. As a school, here's what we can do to help your child to develop some skills and strategies to address these behaviors that are interfering with academic achievement. All right? So we've indicated that there's a problem, and we've indicated that some parents may choose to do this, but we're not making this recommendation that that's what you do. And then you are also saying, as a school, here's what we plan to do about this. So often we see teachers who say, here's what your child is doing in class, they're not being successful, but they don't say, this is what I am doing to help your child. So this has got to be that partnership. And if a parent chooses not to do any type of further assessment, then you cannot not address the behaviors at the educational level. It may be that you want to work with the teacher, may want to do some type of RTI process with the child, but the school has the responsibility to help the child. So let's say fidgets or squirms more than is developmentally appropriate. A school needs to have some interventions prepared to work with this child to help this child calm down and to sit still. Or if the child is still being successful in school, the teacher could choose to ignore that behavior if it's not disruptive. And that's the other thing. I had a parent who asked me to do an ADHD evaluation in my private practice of a child. And I went, the child, it was in fifth grade and had a language arts teacher and then a math science teacher. And the language arts teacher was the one that was really, really talking about her concerns about the behavior. And the math science teacher was saying, I really don't see anything. He's fine in my classroom. And so I went and observed the child in the math science classroom, and the child never stopped moving. He was in constant motion. And there were a couple of times that it was enough that it was obvious he wasn't paying attention, and the teacher kind of pulled him back in and addressed it, but most of the time she ignored it. And so after the observation, which I did a systematic observation, I'm going to discuss that in a minute. After the observation, I said to her, did you not see how much he moves? And she said, really? And she said, I didn't even notice that he was moving that much. And so is just a teacher who is more tolerant of that behavior. You guys, my phone just rang. I'm sorry. And now it's trying to come up on the computer, so let me stop that. She was just really tolerant, and she had, when we looked at the difference in their personal lives, that teacher had 3 boys and was very used to typical boy behavior. The other teacher had 2 little girls and was not, but still was a pretty experienced teacher and should have recognized, some of the differences in that. But part of that was just the level of tolerance of the teacher. So those are the types of things that you want to look at as well. Do you have a teacher that expects all children to sit with their feet on the floor and, sit up straight and not move in their chair? Or do you have a teacher that, I don't care if you're standing on your head, get your homework done or get your work done, don't be a behavior problem. So that's something as a counselor you need to be aware of, as well as what are the expectations of the teacher in the classroom, and then what are their areas that, that they may not be real tolerant of. So I also talked about a systematic observation, and I'm going to tell you, I hate doing these things. They're hard to do, but I'm going to make you do one just so you have experience doing one. Okay, so this first one over here, this is systematic observation of a student performance. So you can use this page here as the cover sheet for this right here. That it gives you some more information. And it's pretty typical, that the fill out, it's pretty self-explanatory that you fill this out, child's name, school, grade, date, day of the week, who observed the child, what time of the day, what time did you go in? I started at, 10:15 and went till 10:45, and what's, I was school counselor. It was in a language arts class, and here's the teacher. And so then you just go off and go down this and click off, for the student. Was the student, with the classroom environment, not the student. This is the classroom environment. Was the classroom quiet, orderly, appropriate temperature? What was the number of students that were in there? Were there any distractions that were occurring in the classroom overall for everybody? Is it well lit? Does it have good acoustics? Anything else you notice? Then you identify the student that you're evaluating, their behavior. So let's say that the student was not actively working, the student appeared to be unorganized and was behaving inappropriately. So then you're going to talk about, the child is having problems in reading comprehension or, whatever, and how these things may be related to that. and then anything else here in the down here, these are the things that you're recommending that maybe could be done differently to assist the child in helping to address these behaviors. So the systematic observation form, again, this stuff up here is pretty self-explanatory. When you go in, okay, you've got, let's look at this first. A 1 is on-task behavior. 2 is making noise. 3 is out of place. 4 is physical contact or making contact with another person or a person's property. And 5 is off task in general. And then you've got this variable 1 and 2. You can put that in there. You don't have to. But if there's other defined behaviors that you are watching for that have been observed that are a problem, then this gives you the ability to identify those and include that in the observation. So each of these lines represents 10 seconds. Okay, so this is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So this is the end of 1 minute right here. So you see you have a target student and then you have their peers. So for 10 seconds, let's say I am watching Kelly. Okay, so I'm watching Kelly and then I'm going to watch another same-sex peer. Okay, and this is going to rotate. So here I'm watching Kelly and Ashley. Here I'm watching Kelly and Katie. Here I'm watching Kelly and Stephanie. And you're going to rotate that among the other students. So every 10 seconds, you have to note what's going on. So the positive is on-task behavior, and then we've got noise, out of place, personal contact, off-task, and if you've identified any other variable. So you're going to circle what Kelly is doing and what Ashley's doing, what Kelly is doing and what Katie is doing for those 10 seconds. And then over here, you can make any notes. So if you have off-task, you might want to make a note over here of what the off-task behavior was. You obviously you have to have a watch with a second hand on it or some way to calculate. So, if I'm watching, let's say I'm watching Kelly and for a minute and a half, Kelly is off task and is cleaning out her desk. Okay, so that's easy to just watch until that behavior changes. You're watching your second hand, and until that behavior changes, it's easy to go. Now over here, it's the rotating to the other students that's a little bit more difficult to do that. So you see that oh, I don't have the full. There's another page to this. I'll get the other page, and when I put this up, I'll put the other page up as well. Let me see, make sure it's not down here now, because you're going to have 100 of these little lines. So I've got another one of these in at my desk, and I'll scan it and put it up. And then that's going to have the way to calculate this as well. So you're going to do this for 15 minutes. And at the end of the 15 minutes, you're just going to go through and you're going to count this up here. Okay? How many of the 100 slots, how many of these was the child on target? How many times were they making noise? How many times were they out of place? And then you're going to have this, you're going to calculate this with peers. And it just gives you something to compare to. So I'm going to put all of this in the module, and I will also give you some more instructions on what you're doing. I'm going to give you a sample. I've got a sample of a student that I did this on, but I need to go out and take the name out so you can't see. So you see what the final report looks like. So you're going to have 2 assignments associated with this. One is to do the evaluation of the Naglieri and who you're recommending for GT and why. I'm sorry, you have 3 things. You're going to do the interpretation of the Iowa test of basic skills, and then you're going to do a systematic observation. So I will put all of that in the module.